All right, so I know all of you are ready to take a nap after this morning and lunch, but we'll try to power through this. I was looking at the time and realizing that we're either going to start the next session early or have a very long break, more than likely. So we'll discuss that once we get there. We've looked at this morning the two first main characters of this story, and the younger brother and the father, and we come to really the climactic point of the story. This third character is the whole reason that Jesus tells this story. In fact, he tells all three stories to build up to this moment, I think, and connects it back to verses 1 and 2, as we talked about, that this is intended for the Pharisees who are upset with Jesus for being willing to hang out with these dirty sinners and tax collectors. There's a song that says, if judgment looms under every steeple, if lofty glances from lofty people can't see past her scarlet letter, and we never even met her, does anybody hear her? Does anybody see? Or does anybody even know she's going down today under the shadow of our steeple with all the lost and lonely people searching for the hope that's tucked away in you and me? Lost people, we would hope, would come back home to God, and what that looks like a lot of times is coming back home to church. The problem with that is, a lot of times when they do that, they aren't received very well. All we see is their mistakes and their faults, their transgressions, their failures. And sadly, I think sometimes Christians are really good at being pharisaical and reminding people of all those mistakes and failures if we're not careful. So that's why it's so hard for us to confess our sins, is because we may not believe that we are sinless, but we certainly like to portray that we are sinless. We get all dressed up for church in our facade to act like we're better than everybody else. And we also don't confess because we know how hard it is to forgive people. We struggle to forgive people, so therefore we know other people are going to struggle to forgive us. And so when somebody actually confesses their sins, they may try to make changes, but so often we really struggle to make or to allow them to change. We want to keep them. And so we have those lofty glances, if you will, because we can't see past, as the song said, I mentioned earlier, her scarlet letter. So this story hopefully helps us understand some of that. So we come to the story of the older brother. All you know is that one day, if you're this brother, what you know is that one day your brother has a discussion with the father, and you wake up and find out that you've lost one of the workers off the family farm. We know it's a farm because when he shows up, this son shows up, he's out in the fields, right? So it's an agrarian society. He is a worker. The younger brother would have been a worker. For some of us with siblings, we might think that this is a happy moment. Oh, he's finally gone. I have everything to myself. I don't have to put up with my younger bratty brother. But that's just not accurate. That's just not accurate. It would have been a great detriment to the family unit and especially to the family business. Because again, you've lost somebody. So while that younger brother's gone, every day, this older brother has to carry the responsibility of running the family business by himself. Because not only is the younger brother gone, but if what we said is true before lunch about the father anticipating the son's return, the father's not much help either, at least not fully. Because he's not out in the fields. He's out front waiting for this younger son to return. So we see that in verse 20. And I've often wondered if there was ever this moment, and I know this is an allegory, an illustration, a parable, but I've often wondered if this is, ever would have bbeen this day where the older brother would have gone out and said, Dad, what are you doing? He's never coming home. I need you to get back and help. I need you to do that. And maybe that's too much poetic license, but we do know that the father's not working. We do know that the son is no longer there. So what we have is really ultimately potentially the loss of two workers, certainly one. There's a detriment, a great detriment to the family unit and to the family business. And then on top of that, then one day we just get told that he comes home and there's this celebration going on. And that had to be confusing because he would have known if there was a planned party. He would have understood there was something going on. Because also I think we should assume this is a fairly well-off family. They have servants, remember? They have servants and they have a ring and a robe. This is a well-off family. And so here's a celebration. He comes home from working out in the fields and he knows nothing about this. And so in verse 25, the older son was in the field, and when he came home, drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. He calls one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he's received him back safe and sound. But he's angry, and he refused to go in. This is your brother, your younger brother, who is left with a third of everything the family owns. And he has been gone, and it's obvious to you that he has wasted his money because he's home. Why else would he be home? And because of that, he says, essentially, I'm not going in the house. He refuses to celebrate. He refuses to enter the party. He stands out back behind the house and refuses to go in. And so, the father's conversation, we read that this morning. Let's read it again starting in verse 29. He answered his father, look, this many years I have served you. I've never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who's devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. In verse 31, the father says, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and to be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. I want you to notice something about the older brother, that in his feeling of injustice, he makes 4 inflammatory statements here in this text. The first of those is literally in the language, I have been here slaving for you. He says all these years I've been here serving you. There's a little bit lost on that. He's equating himself with a bondage servant or a slave, as if he was forced to do that and had no rights, as if the father owned him. But the problem with that is he's not a bondage servant. He's not a slave. He's a son. And not only is he a son, he's a son that's received everything there in inheritance. The second one of these, if you're a parent, you realize how inflammatory this is. I have never disobeyed you. That's just not possible, right? And even if you had the most perfect child, maybe you thought never was willfully defiant, there were times that child disobeyed their parents. This is just realistic. And so that's where we start to get clued in. Like these two statements together, right, tell us this guy is overstating things. This is an exaggeration. This isn't real. So then the third one is, well, you never gave me. And we know that this is an exaggerated statement because when the father divides the property, he divides it between the two of them. So he literally gave him everything. Everything that is there is the older brother's. It's not the younger brother's. Younger brother took everything that was his. Older brother kept everything that is his, and that's where the family lives. Which leads us to the fourth, which is an interesting statement, which just says here, if we can get to work, the son of yours has devoured your property. And specifically, he even says how, right? He says with prostitutes. And here's what's interesting about that. Number one, the son did not devour the father's property because it was the son's property. The father gave it to the son. And at that moment, it becomes the younger son's property to do with whatever he wants. Remember, in Acts 5, that principle is laid out in that story, right, about Ananias and Sapphira when they don't tell how much money. And one of the things that Peter says there is, while it was your own, it was yours. What's yours is yours, right? This was the young son's property. But in addition to that, this choice that he gives him, this ability to choose, we need to understand that when God gives us the ability to make free choice, when he gives us our life, like we talked about in the first lesson this morning, it is ours to do with as we please. Now, we have to bear the consequences of that. But we get to spend our life any way we want. And this charge that it's with prostitutes is completely unfounded. And why that's ironic is that's really where we base a lot of what we say about what the young son did while he was gone. I know a lot of people read this, and they read this and give credit to the older brother for knowing what the younger son did. And by the way, I'm not saying the younger son didn't do that. I'm saying there's no way to know what he did. And especially the older brother who has not seen his younger brother since he left. He is merely outside and will not even come in and talk to him. But suddenly, and oddly, he knows, just from the circumstances, exactly what happened. You need to understand what's going on here. Jesus is connecting this brother to the Pharisees who talked about Jesus hanging out with sinners, tax collectors, and prostitutes. And that's why he says this, because this is what the Pharisees have done to Jesus. They look at circumstances and situations, and they make a decision, a judgment, a criticism about that without even knowing what's going on. Think about Zacchaeus. They see him at Zacchaeus' house, and they criticize him. But if you read the story of Zacchaeus, Zacchaeus is actually in the effort of restoration when Jesus comes to his house. But just because of what he does, he's a sinner. And so it's very interesting to think about from that standpoint what's going on here. All of this means that the older brother is outside throwing a fit saying, this isn't fair. You're not being fair. And that's why when Jesus tells the story, the father comes out and says, everything that is here belongs to you. This is fair. This is just. There is no injustice in this story. Period. But the older brother is convinced that there is. Well, who's the older brother? And that's the hard part here, I think. Now, no doubt, the Pharisees are who he's pointing fingers at. He is the one that he is saying. But I also want you to know that all of us, well, we go too far, there we go. All of us have played this role. All of us at some time have looked at somebody and have looked down upon them for what they do, or we just look at somebody, maybe it's not even sin, but we think that for whatever reason, they're getting better treatment than us, and it's not fair. And because of that, we don't want to celebrate them. We make them out to be the bad guy. We have all at some point failed to rejoice over the return of the lost. And what I mean by that is we have held people's sins over their head even after they've confessed them, and we have reminded them of those sins and temptations they face, and we even go as far as label them. I have heard people, I'm a lot older than Nick. I've preached for about 29 years. I have heard people pour out their hearts and about their sins and their temptations and what they're dealing with, only for people to turn around and to label that as them the rest of their life. I had a guy one time say, people talk about forgiveness, but the fact is we're not forgiving. They look at me as someone who is always going to be guilty. And that's because of something he publicly confessed. So the sister that struggles with alcohol and confesses that, we always look at as a drunk. And the person who has done drugs and struggles with that, we look at them as a drug addict. And the person whose homosexuality they've struggled with, they're the gay guy. Or the person with adultery is the one with the scarlet letter. And while we may not put the literal A on our clothing, we do the same thing. And all of that is because we don't see the return of sinners the way God does, as a reason to celebrate. And part of that is, I think, because in some cases we have seen the sinner return over and over and over again, and we get somewhat desensitized to that one person, and sometimes we think to ourselves, oh, it's just them getting attention again. When we do that, when we act that way, we're still being this person. Can't be that way, ever. We've all sinned. We've all been the younger brother. We have all left home. We've all told God we don't need him. And that makes us just as guilty as the alcoholic or the person who practices homosexuality or the adulterer. It makes us just as guilty of all of that. And this parable is trying to show us specifically, and to the Pharisees specifically, that they don't see people in their return the way they should. And if we get nothing out of these series of lessons this weekend, this is the point. And I will tell you that I think this is part of the reason why evangelism suffers so much in our churches, is because we don't celebrate with the return like we should, and we don't see the return of the lost to be the great thing that it is in God's eyes. And therefore, when we live in a world full of lost people, it just doesn't faze us anymore. Because to some degree, we've convinced that everybody wants to be lost. Those people don't want to know the truth. Those people don't care about Jesus. Those people don't want to know the gospel. And my response to that is, how do you know? If you sit back and you convince yourselves never to say anything to those people, how do you know? Everybody in this room, by the way, is here because somebody talked to one of those people. And it may not have been you. You may be like me that grew up in the church, but it may be somebody who is your ancestor that somebody went to and talked to about Jesus, who other people looked at and said, they don't care about Jesus. They don't even know about Jesus. They don't care. They've already got their own system of beliefs. Why am I talking to them? Somebody went and talked to those people, and that's why you're here. So instead of looking at those people every day, go talk to those people and tell them about Jesus. Why? Because the Father wants them to come home. If we would just love people the way God loves people. And that's what's wrong with the Pharisees, right? They do not love people the way God loves people. So let's think about what we learned here. I don't have a green light, but it looks like it's working, so we'll go with it. First, God will treat us justly. We talked about this in the last lesson, but we want to make sure we get it again. This older brother's, his whole objection is, it's not fair. It's not fair. He's afraid the younger brother's going to get more than him, and that's not true. He's not going to get more than him. He's not going to get another inheritance. Verse 31, everything here belongs to you. All that I have is yours. I said this before lunch. We struggle with justice and mercy so much. I struggle with justice and mercy with my own kids. How do I properly enforce rules but also show them forgiveness? And I will tell you, to those who are parents, that we do need to practice mercy and grace, because I think that's one of the ways our kids learn about what mercy is when it comes to God, is we teach them that. Just like respecting us builds a respect for God, hopefully, us showing mercy and grace and how to do that, that shows what mercy and grace is from God. But God doesn't struggle because he's perfect. And so there's not going to be any injustice here. That's a promise you can count on. And I think it's important to say this, too, for the older brother. He should be commended because he is the one who stayed home and did work and did all of the things while everything else around him fell apart. Now, part of that's because he knows deep down in that that's his stuff. And he's working for himself. But he should be commended for that. But also realize God will be fair. Secondly, along those lines, with privilege comes responsibility. There we go. In verse 29, he has that whole list of things that he has against the Father. And he says there, I have been all this time serving you. All these years I've been here your slave. Why didn't I get a celebration? Why didn't I get a fattened calf? Among Christians sometimes, this is a problem I think that we need to be aware of, and that's just simply, there's sometimes people who do a lot of work, a lot of long hours serving God and visiting sick and showing hospitality, and then somebody does something that seems minuscule and they get recognized for it, and this other person over here gets upset because they want to know, well, I do all this other stuff and nobody ever talks about me. Nobody ever praises me. Why did I've had people say, why did you put so-and-so in the bulletin and I do all these other things? The answer to that, by the way, Nick, is don't print a bulletin anymore. But that's the same attitude as the older brother. I have slaved away all these years and nobody celebrated me. Well, the older brother had more privilege. He got 2/3 of everything. And with that privilege, that double portion privilege, came the responsibility to be the one who stays and inherits the property and inherits the land and all the things that go with it. That's part of why he got the privilege. He's the son of the birthright. That's what he's supposed to do. And so with that privilege comes more responsibility. In other words, he's complaining, but that's what he's supposed to do. That's what he's supposed to do. And I think one of the problems sometimes is we as Christians want to make a big deal out of everything we do. We want to celebrate everything that we do. We want to make sure everybody gets to see and recognizes us for that. By the way, in the times of Jesus, who were the worst at that? Who sat in the chief seats so people could recognize them? Who made their phylacteries larger? Who put longer fringes on their garments in order that people could recognize them and hear them coming? Who prayed out in the street, God, I thank you, I'm not like other people. I fast and I tithe, and I thank you that I'm not like this tax collector over here. It was the Pharisees. The Pharisees wanted the pomp and circumstance when they walk into the room. They want everybody to turn heads and look at them. They wanted to be recognized for being the religiously superior people among their people. And they wanted to be celebrated for all of that. And Jesus is calling that to mind with this story. I want to be celebrated. How come you don't celebrate me? Well, you're just doing what you're supposed to do. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus said, when you give to the needy, don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing, so your giving can be in secret, for your Father who sees in secret will reward you. We don't do things to be seen. We don't do things to be... and remember when he talks about fasting in the Sermon on the Mount? That's directed to the Pharisees too. Don't make the faces long so people ask you, what are you doing? So you can tell you're fasting. That's what's going on there. They want recognition, and Jesus is calling that out in this story. Every part of this brother, by the way, is Pharisaical. Every step along the way. And so we need to realize with privilege brings responsibility. We also need to learn that we have to have a serving attitude. What a stark contrast, by the way. Then in verse 29, what is the bitter brother's complaint? I have been all these years here doing what? Serving you. Being a slave for you, right? What did the younger brother want when he came home? Just to be a servant. Which of these two were more acceptable? And what makes them different? One complains about serving, and one's humble enough to just want to serve. A life with God is an attitude of service, right? And so we have to be willing to serve and to serve other people. Go back to the Matthew 25 we talked about, that you have these three stories about here's coming judgment. What do I have to do? Be prepared, 10 virgins. Serve the master, parable of the talents. Serve other people, the throne scene. Your life is about service. We have to serve other people. How can I put my neighbor first if my neighbor has wronged me? I can forgive him. The responsibility to love your neighbor as yourself would have required this older brother to go in the house and celebrate the younger brother. But part of the problem is he can't serve other people because he's too interested in serving himself. The older brother sits on the throne in his life. Not God, not Jehovah, himself. We have to have humility to serve. And also got to be forgiving. We talked about that some too, but the older brother fails to forgive the younger brother. In fact, he says, and there's some pretty inflammatory language, he says, this son of yours, it's not even my brother. I want nothing to do with him. He's not even my family anymore. We're done. I want you to consider, we talked about Matthew 6, 14 and 15 already, but let's read that again. Matthew chapter 6, verses 14 to 15. For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will forgive you. But if you do not forgive them their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. Matthew 18, 21 through 22. Peter says, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? And Jesus said, I do not say to you 7 times, but 70 times 7. Luke 6:37, judge not, be not judged, condemn not, you will be not condemned. Forgive, and forgive, you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken up, running over, will put into your lap. For the measure you use, it'll be used back to you. The measure of forgiveness you use will be used back to you. Luke 17, 3-4, pay attention to yourselves. If your brother sins, rebuke him. If he repents, forgive him. If he sins against you 7 times a day and turns to you 7 times saying, I repent, you must forgive him. Colossians 3, 12 through 13. Put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, patience, bearing with one another. And if one has a complaint against another, forgive each other as the Lord has forgiven you, so you must also forgive. Over and over and over again, what do you read? You are forgiven as you forgive others. Period. So if you hold a grudge and refuse to forgive somebody, you're not going to spend eternity with God. It's just that simple. And the problem with that is we're like the bitter brother. We like some grudges. We like to carry baggage around for other people. We like to cling to it and not let it go. And that puts our soul in jeopardy. Who are you? Who are you as one who's also sinned, and I would suggest probably still struggles with things in your life, to withhold forgiveness from somebody else, from anybody else? And if you've experienced the grace of Christ and of God, why would you withhold that from anybody else? Why do we create colonies of special spiritual lepers that are the outcasts of the church that we label and almost like stay away, unclean, unclean? If we act that way, all of us should be in that colony because all have sinned. Who are we to judge these people? And the thing you need to realize is it breaks the relationship. This unwillingness to forgive is what makes this brother say he's no longer my brother. He's your son, but he's not my brother. Withholding forgiveness damages our relationships. And that fear of being treated that way is why we don't practice James 5, 15 and 16 of confessing our trespasses to one another. It's why we don't do that. Because we know, even if somebody says they'll forgive us, they will never forget it. And it's hard to overcome that. The older brother, no doubt, thought that the younger brother got off easy because, hey, where are his consequences? He gets to come home. He gets to do exactly whatever he wants to do. But the older brother doesn't realize how far the younger brother went, does he? He doesn't know how far he fell. He doesn't know the story about the pig pen. He doesn't know the story about the famine. He doesn't know the story about wanting to eat what the pigs eat. He doesn't know all of the consequences. And I want you to remember that because that's what happens. The penitent sinner, when they finally come back, when they finally have the boldness and courage to come back, they bring with them a whole host of guilt and shame that we don't even understand or know about. The amount of courage it takes them to come back, not to God, but to us. To us, can be overwhelming. And to come back and to say, I have failed and I have not done what I should do. to confess those sins. What they need beyond our criticism and our judgment and our categorizing them as something less than us acting like Pharisees and going, I'm not going to eat with those tax collectors and sinners over there. What they need is a hug. They need acceptance. They need love. I heard the story of a couple that was married. They'd been married for about 15 years. And they had their share of disagreements. Marriages are like that, usually. And so they were working on their marriage after 15 years, and the wife had a really good idea. She said that they would take this whole month and they would have what's called a fault box. And what they would do is every time they got frustrated with their spouse, they would write the frustration down on a piece of paper and put it in the fault box. And then at the end of the month, they would go out on a date and they would open up the fault box. The wife thought this was a terrific idea, by the way. Just the thought of it has some of us men going, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. So they go out to dinner. And she's so excited she can barely wait. So she hands him her box full of these little pieces of paper. So he takes them out. And there's things like leaving the top off of the jelly jar, didn't put the socks in the hamper, wet towel on the floor. And it's just paper after paper of all these little grievances she had that drove her crazy, and he just reads them. And so he goes, okay. She goes, well, give me yours. She's all excited. So he slides it over. And she pulls out the first paper, and it just says, I love you. Pulls out the second one, it says, I love you. Every time that he got frustrated, he just wrote, I love you, and put it in the box. Well, I think you get the point. We can hold every grievance against other people, and we can make sure that they find out about it because we want to make sure they know how they upset us. Or we can just love them. And we can let those grievances go. The Pharisees couldn't let it go. They refused to let it go. And this whole story is to tell them that they're wrong for that. And we are too. So, may God help us to overcome that. All right, Nick, it is 22. Huh? 250. We'll start back at 250? 250. All right, we'll start back at 250.